14 centuries ago, in Northumbria, in England, when Edward was king, there was a convention of all the nobles. Why? Because Christian missionaries had come to their pagan shores. What will we do with these men? Will we listen to them? An old grizzled warrior stood up and said, if they can tell us about death, we'll listen to them. Is not man like a swallow that comes in our first open door into the warmth and light of this hall, but then goes out the last doorway into darkness? Isn't man like that? Can the Christians tell us what happens after death? I want to read to you something that's very significant on this very question. I'm going to read to you from Colossians chapter 3. In Colossians chapter 3 and verses 1 to 4, Paul says this, and if you understand this, you'll understand the mystery of death. Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 to 4. If you then be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ sits on the right hand of God. Set your affection on things above, not on things on the earth. For you are dead, and your life is hid with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, shall appear, then shall you also appear with him in glory. So the Bible teaches, if we truly trust in Jesus Christ, God counts that we did what he did. That's why Luther said, mine are Christ's living and dying, as though I'd lived his life and died his death. If one died for all, then all died. And so in Colossians, remember, as far as God is concerned, your whole life is dead. You already have a resurrection life. And if Christ delivers you from the pit of sin, then one day he'll resurrect you from the grave to immortality. The word immortality occurs in 1 Timothy 6, and there it says, God only hath immortality. In Romans 2, 5 and 6, it says, seek for honour, glory and immortality. You don't seek for that which you've already got. There's an old legend of a man that had visions of hell and heaven. Hell first. And he saw tables, miles, kilometres of tables filled with glorious food and trillions of people starving, sitting at the table. But every man had a fork, 3 feet long, tied to his right hand. The left hand was immobile, couldn't move it. But no one could use their fork to feed themselves, and so the trillions were starving. But then there was another vision, and again kilometres of tables crowded with wonderful food, but this time millions of happy people enjoying the food. The same as before, 3-foot fork attached to the right hand, but each man fed the man on the other side of the table. So everybody was fed, and that, dear friends, was a picture of heaven. When we've learned to give, when we've learned to love, when we've learned to share, that's heaven below, and it'll lead to heaven above. The man that wrote Colossians 3, 1 to 4 was once a fierce persecutor of the Christian church. He hated Christians. He took them to death. He rejoiced when Stephen the martyr shed his blood, crying that God would forgive the people killing him. But one day on a mission to destroy Christians, he met the risen Christ, who said, Saul, Saul, that was his first name, why are you persecuting me? And Saul received a commission, a new name, Paulos, that means little. When you see God as he is, Christ as he is, then you are very little. And Paul was told, you will be my witness to the ends of the earth. You know, it's a very strange thing. The Old Testament's all written by Jewish writers, and the New, except for Luke. But in the Old Testament, in many, many places, beginning at Genesis 12 and verse 3, it predicts that that tiny nation, living in a land smaller than Tasmania, would one day plant its principles of truth in all the nations of the world. Read about it in Isaiah chapter 49, where God says to the Messiah, you will be my instrument to Israel. You'll be the glory of Israel. But you'll be a light to the Gentiles, the heathen, those that know not God. Over and over, Isaiah 2, the book of Micah, book of Malachi, over and over. The Old Testament teaches that the essentials of the Jewish religion, God, law, love, sacrifice, would one day spread to the ends of the earth. And when Saul was converted to Paul, God said, you will do it. You will do it. You know, Paul is the most important man who ever lived next to Jesus Christ. He changed the whole history of the Roman world. He changed all the future. Because of Paul, we got the Reformation with Martin Luther. Because of Paul, we had the conversion of John Wesley and Charles Wesley and John Newton. Because of Paul, Adoniram Judson went to the golden shore of Burma and took the gospel there. Because of Paul. But I want to tell you about another Paul. This is also a true story, but it's an old story. Beginning of the 19th century. His name was Paul Villiard. He remembered when he was only about 3 or 4, seeing that gadget called a telephone attached to the wall on the lower landing of the house. And he saw his mother picked up what was called the receiver, and she would say, information please. And then as the little boy watched, the mother received information, the correct time, someone else's phone number or something else. One day when his mother was away, the little boy had an accident. He was in his father's tool shed and he whacked his finger with a hammer. Began to cry. Then he stopped because there's no one there to sympathise. No use crying. He went back into the house and then he saw the telephone. And he grabbed a small table, climbed on the table, lifted the receiver and did what his mother often did. Information please. And he heard a slight voice. Information. And Paul Villiard said, I've hurt my finger and I'm crying. And information please said, don't cry, have you got an ice chest? Yes. Well, get a pick and pick off a bit of ice and put it on your sore finger. It'll soon be better and your mother will soon be home. Will you do that? Yes, said Paul, and he did it. But in the days and months to come, he kept calling information please for help with geography, with arithmetic. Where was Philadelphia? What was Orinoco? He wanted to go there when he was a big man, and she helped him with everything. But the day came when their pet canary died. So he called information please, and he cried about the death of Peter. And she said the usual things that adults say to children, but he wouldn't be comforted. And finally she said, Paul, listen to me. There are other worlds to sing in. Paul, there are other worlds to sing in. And he seemed to get it. But in a matter of months, his family moved to Boston. Years later, going to college, he had to sit down in the city of his former home, Seattle. And just without thinking, he picked up the phone to get information, please, at his hometown. And he heard a familiar voice. And he said, "How do you spell fix?" Because that was a question he'd asked her long ago. "Oh," she said, "it's you. I guess your finger's better by now." "Yes," he said, "but you'll never know the times I've thought of you. You'll never know how grateful I've been that you were so kind to a little boy. You bothered to answer all his questions. Do you mind if I call you again when I'm in the city?" "No," said she. "Ask for Sally, and I should tell you you've meant a lot for me, because I have no children of my own. I used to look forward to your calls. Thank you for them, Paul. Please call me again and ask for Sally." Months later, when his plane stopped down again at Seattle, he called, but a strange voice answered when he sought for information, please. And the voice said, "Are you looking for Sally?" He said, "Yes." "I'm sorry," said the voice at the other end. "Sally has been sick 4 weeks, and she died 5 weeks ago. Are you an old friend?" "Yes," said Paul, "I'm an old friend." She said, "Is your name Villiard?" "Yes," he said, "I've got a message for you." Said information. Here it is. From Sally to Paul Villiard. "Tell Paul, I still say there are other worlds to sing in, and he'll understand." And he did. And today I ask you, do you understand? If you're a believer in Christ, there are other worlds beside this sad, war-torn, impure, fraudulent world. There are other worlds to sing in. God's world. Make sure of them. I trust in Christ. God bless you.